Today's guest is Major Ed Dames, U.S. Army retired. He is the world's premier psychic spy, and he has served as the training and operation officer for the Defense Intelligence Agency's top secret psychic intelligence unit. Currently, he serves as the director for the Matrix Intelligence Agency, a private consulting group, and he's here with us today. Major Dames, thank you so much for joining me, and welcome.
Pleasure to be here, Jeff. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. My audience is really interested in near-death and out-of-body experiences. So can we please just simply start with what is remote viewing and how is that different than astral traveling or having an out-of-body experience?
Remote viewing is a mind tool, strictly a mind tool. It has nothing to do with one's spirituality, generally speaking. And in the former military unit, there was a period where we did use altered states. We put a viewer into, it's called extended remote viewing now, into an altered state where they're right on the borderline between wakefulness and sleep. And that's when we give them the military target in a blank envelope. The target photo is inside, something like that. But I abandoned that as the training officer for the unit because coordinate remote viewing, discovered by Ingo Swann in Stanford Research Institute in the laboratory, was far more successful in terms of accuracy, at which, of course, in the military, we need that. If you're going to deal with deadly force or like in life or death situations, you want to be accurate. So in an altered state, you're still not out of body, or that's not astral travel. It's still a mind tool. We tried to employ out of body experiences to no avail, or astral travel as the civilians call it, to no avail. Because, for instance, I had a young lieutenant on the bed in a darkened room. I'm sitting at a table and transcribing notes while he's on target. And I tried to put him into an out of body state. And he went, and he was gone. He couldn't communicate with me anymore, as you might know. So I pop him back about 10 minutes later. He started to fall asleep. And I said, Wilson, what gives? He said, sir, you were not going to believe this. I'm perched up here at the top of the room looking down at you and me. And all of this, I said, Wilson, Did you get the information on that Scud transporter erector launcher? Is it fueling in the Czech forest right now? Sir, you wouldn't believe it was such an amazing, you get the bit gist. It wasn't useful as a military tool. As a personal development tool, I'm sure, but I have no time to experiment with that. So that's the difference between remote viewing is strictly a mind tool, strictly mind. Everything exists in the universe as a pattern of information. This is our working hypothesis. How it actually works, we don't know. We leave that to the academicians and the scientists to figure out. We have a job to do. So if it's not broken, don't fix it. Everything exists as a pattern of information, and mind can tune in to these patterns in space and time. And we've learned how to do that, both in the laboratory, and then later it was my job to take the discovery being the syntax and grammar, for, so to speak, of how unconscious communicates accurately with conscious awareness. Very systematic tool. I'll go into that momentarily. Well, my job was to take that into the deep, dark world of military intelligence, massage it into an information collection skill that we could use on the battlefield. So, and that has a long history. But it's strictly a mind tool, not a spirit. No, if anybody says anything like spiritual remote viewing, run, because that has nothing to do with spirit. It's all mind.
When you say you get them into an altered state, would you have them go through some kind of deep breathing or some kind of relaxation?
No, it was electronic, Jeff. It was electronic. What we did, we had the individuals laying in a bed in a darkened room. I, as a facilitator, had a little table with a red light, so to keep this guy under, and would transcribe things. But they were electrically wired up, so we were measuring the voltage from the knee to the top of the head, and a few other things too. And when the voltage dropped a whole body voltage, because your brain is a great electrical generator. I mean, it's an oscillator. Mm-hmm. Your heart as well, although the heart's magnetic field is greater than the brain's electrical field. So we wired up, and when you could use either an analog meter or an oscilloscope. Mm-hmm. In the case of the analog meter, when the voltage slipped down and hit zero, that's when you give the viewer the target. And in the case of an oscilloscope, when you had a 180 flip in the sine wave, target that the viewer was ready for the target, right on the verge, right on the edge of sleep and consciousness. And they were able to talk, but the voice was very slurred. And you had to be very careful as a monitor, facilitator, not to bounce them back up into conscious awareness, or they would lose the target. The targets, and I've been under it too, they're very interesting. It is almost an experience, where remote viewing is nothing but an experience. It's strictly work, like playing the piano. I'll get back into that momentarily. But you're looking in extended remote viewing in an altered state. You're looking at the target. It's black and white, and it's very myopic. You're looking at a target through a tube, and it's very accurate, but it's not. You can get to the target, but in terms of dimensionality, the distance between this gun and this person, this bomb and this, all those things are lost. You can't. You lose your sense of perspective in that modality. That's why, as training officer, I shifted everybody to this new technology, new in 1984. Coordinate remote viewing, and it's evolved in the last 35 years to become much more accurate. And it was originally conceived by folks at the CIA as a tool to collect as much accurate information about a technical target in as short a period of time as possible. So a remote viewing session, technical remote viewing session, is what I've developed. It's about 45 minutes in duration, with a break if you need it at a certain point. And you can solve about 2/3 of the projects in about 45 minutes. For more complex things, the etiology of disease, the hydrogen leak on the space shuttle, those kinds of things, or for instance, the contract I did for the late Lawrence Rockefeller, atmospheric ozone depletion, projected consequences, and remedial technologies, those kinds of things take a team of 4 to 5 professionals a week to solve.
So
that's a mouthful.
Yeah. Are you saying that you're just kind of running a low-level current through the body, and then you watch a meter?
No, the body is generating the current.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, and we're measuring the voltage, and we're putting somebody down without using drugs. Now, the GRU, the Soviet military intelligence, they attempted to use drugs, but drugs don't work. Yeah. Because if you use a mind-expanding drug, Halcyon, LSD, or something akin to those, they are mind-expanding. But what happens, technically speaking, the dynamics are, you think of the modem on your computer, but it's managing all the stuff that's out there, which is infinite, almost in number, in terms of information. But it's managing that. If you disconnect the modem from your computer, now you have access to the entire internet, right? Mm-hmm. Well, this is akin or analogous to what happens in the mind-expanding drug. You have no modem. You have no control over getting to your target, even the memory of what the target was. So that's not useful in terms of in fact, they killed one young troop, overdosed. It's not useful in terms of military and information collection. But in our work, in technical remote viewing, your eyes are open. It's not a relax, lay back, and tell me what you see. None of that. And in fact, I'll hit the viewers over the head if they even close their eyes. Closing your eyes invites imagination, for one thing. Not to get it too technical, because there's a lot of technicalities that we learn. But it's a 3-part process. One is setting up the target, which is complex. And maybe on another show, I'll go into some of that. Running the sessions, and that's the hard part for viewers to learn, because you are not allowed to think when you're remote viewing. Your eyes are open. You're moving through a set of protocols for 45 minutes, very similar to play, for instance, and analogously to playing the piano. You don't, the sheet music is akin to our protocols, our operational protocols, very different than laboratory protocols. And so we're going through point to point to point to point, pulling information from our superconscious, which is, and we're in a theta state electrically. Our brains are in a theta state. For instance, if you're a jogger and you get into a groove, or you just drove down the freeway and you can't remember the last 10 minutes, you're in a theta state. Yeah, we can talk about other states later. So we're in a theta state, and we're downloading. When we get our unconscious to the target, and then the unconscious takes over from there and delivers up information to conscious awareness. We write that down, write it down, and then we keep on moving for 45 minutes. So, for instance, if you're playing the piano, you don't stop and think about the note that you just played, or the music stops. So you're not allowed to think. And this is the frustrating part for a new remote viewer trainee, because we experience the learning process as we grow up. We learn by studying something. But remote viewing is direct knowledge. Bam. There's no learning involved. You download the information directly from the target. In terms of all kinds of information, you begin with sensory impressions, and that turns into higher level things, intangible ideas about a target, and the tangible things that are present at a target as well. So by the time we're finished with the session, now the third part is data analysis. Data analysis does require you to be back in your left brain, the analytical part of your brain, where, as we grow up in terms of the English language, the concatenation of subject, verb, object, that kind of thing like that. The reason I speak fluent Chinese, and I've lived in China. The reason why the Chinese and other Asian cultures that employ ideographic languages have a higher IQ is because the ideograms, each of the characters, is really a pictogram, a picture. And so they have to analyze the picture and then place that in context, which is linear. So they're using both the right and left side of the brain in terms of that analogy. They're using both sides of the brain, which gives them a higher IQ. Where in the Western world, everything is linear, time, everything. But in the remote viewing, we're in the right brain, the same way a painter would paint. I mean, a good painter.
Right. That's amazing that you brought that up. I knew that the Japanese language had those kind of pictogram characters along with letters, but I didn't realize Chinese had the same thing as well.
Well, no, the Japanese got their character, kanji and katakana, from the Chinese language. Chinese has as a scholar, let's say a postgraduate scholar, you need to know about 30,000 characters, 30 to 32,000, to read a newspaper, 500 to 1,000. So, and there is a very, very, very it took me more than 14 years to learn to write and to write Chinese, because the stroke orders are not willy-nilly. They have to be in a certain order. That's why calligraphers, it's so beautiful. Because it starts from the idea of a picture, the moon, for instance, and a person walking or running.
Would you say then that the Chinese would make better remote viewers?
Well, I've taught a lot of Asians. My sons are half Chinese, and any Asian would make a better remote viewer because of for the reasons that the aforementioned reasons. And I haven't taught that many Asians, but enough to know that there's a distinct difference in the way they process incoming information.
I was watching one of your recent YouTube videos, and you were talking about the morphogenetic field in that video. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, the Rubik Sheldrake. There's only two books that I recommend that my students read. Only two. One is Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Professor Emeritus Betty Edwards, because drawing is very helpful in our work. in several stages. And the other book is Rupert Sheldrake's, the original book, The Presence of the Past, where he talks about the morphogenetic field. And he uses in that book, he says, he has theories that have subsequently been proven. But in that book, he talks about, for instance, the great tit in England. The bird population of the great tits in the northern part of the UK were, in the old days, were pecking through the foil wrapper on the top of glass milk bottles. You're probably too young to remember that milk bottles used to be delivered on the doorstep in the winter. So the great tits were pecking through that to drink the milk. And almost weeks later, a colony of great tits in the southern part of the country were doing the same thing. And there was no connection between them, were known. So this is an example of what Sheldrake means by the morphogenetic field. His term, we use the same field in our work too, a mind field, if you will, a universal mind, where this behavior, this positive behavior, was picked up by the southern colony. And in my other YouTube videos at MajorDamesNews.com, I talk about how viruses can afford themselves of that same connection in order to outsmart things like vaccines.
That's how they're mutating, was from the morphogenetic field, or just outsmart?
That's partially, that may be. I don't know, I'd have to study it. But I do know that there's information is crossing between different populations. And I don't know if that's what's causing the mutations, because mutations are normally caused by a toxicological insult, an environmental insult, radiation or something like that. But these viruses now are for instance, the COVID-19 the mutations are going nuts. They're really speeding up. So I think the virus has learned how to avail itself of this field and communicate with all, as a swarm intelligence, and it's outsmarting us. The AIDS epidemic outsmarted us. Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, that outsmarted us. It remains latent in the brain for up to 10 years, wakes up and starts chomping away. That's pretty smart. We haven't killed it.
Right. That's interesting to think about, that if these diseases or viruses or bacteria have some kind of collective consciousness, that they're communicating with each other.
Yeah, because the pattern is the same. For instance, in our work, in terms of gestalts and archetypes, a remote viewer in basic training who's given a blind target, they don't know what the target is, they're just given a number that's associated with the target. If their target is a mountain or a mountain range, it's perceived archetypically as the same thing. A mountain and a mountain range are perceived archetypically as the same thing. You think about the DNA between twins. Let's say, a twin, the DNA is identical. So it's just like tuning forks, right? You hit one tuning fork and the other one resonates in the same room. Well, DNA twins is the same thing. They can be parsecs away and in different times, but if the one will respond to the other. We know these stories about twins growing up because their DNA is identical and the symmetry is important. Very, very important. I don't want to get into technicalities about how in the future, when we looked at how spaceships communicate with each other, what's the Star Trek? It's instantaneous because of entangled particles and entangled, because of what we discovered as the way entanglement works. So even though in terms of physical travel, these particular space travelers are distant, their communication is instantaneous when they develop these boxes. And we've watched in the future how technologists develop this. So it's coming. You
mentioned twins, and I want to get your take on this. I had a recent guest that suffers from sleep apnea, and while, I guess, going to sleep one night, he first felt a tingling in his body, a vibration, an energy, and then all of a sudden, he started hearing a radio station halfway across the country, and then he felt like he was hearing NASA talking to the space station or something. So do you think that he kind of may have got into a relaxed state where he's kind of tapping into some kind of super conscious thing, or do you have any interpretation of that?
No, Jeff. We'd have to actually take that incident, him, that individual, and that incident, and subject it to technical remote viewing. That's the only way I would be able to have. And even then, the problem, the whatever happened, the incident may be beyond our ken. There's a lot of things that are beyond our ken. We're born in this particular environment, these particular factors, human resonant frequency, bicameral brain. There's a lot of things that we cannot process. It's available to us as remote viewers, but we can't process it. For instance, when you die,
right?
We've done years and years of research about looking at a person when they die. There's certain physical things that happen. A glowing light leaves and all of this. But we cannot, as remote viewers, track that particular thing, this essence or whatever, this ka, this ba. We can't track it. Now, we've stumbled across worlds that appear to be in other dimensions where we think, or postulate that perhaps this continuity of consciousness is reinstalled, but we have no chain of custody. So we can't say that this is where we go or this is where we're reinstalled when we die. There's no common denominator for the soul, or whatever you want to call it, this vital essence, and anything that we're aware of in our lifetime, our short lifetimes. We can't process the information. We don't understand. It's beyond our ken. So we'd have to study this individual. We can get into dreams. If you have a recurring dream, that may be really important. For instance, if a person has a recurring dream of a battle over and over, it doesn't go away, that could be your unconscious your best friend. Your best friend is your unconscious. Its role is to keep you alive, and secondarily, quality of life. But it could be telling you have pancreatic cancer. But the seed of the dream starts as the pancreatic cancer. Think of an analogy of a snowball, pristine snowball on the top of a mountain. And then in the dream, whether it's 20 minutes or 2 hours when you're in delta and coming up in the alpha as you awaken, as the snowball rolls down the hill, it picks up all this debris and detritus and crap and junk. And that's all the thoughts, that stuff you have to process, your divorce and all the stuff. Your pancreatic cancer idea gets lost in all of that. But as a remote viewer, just come to me and say, Ed, I keep having this dream of this battle. I said, okay, Jeff's recurring battle dream / we qualify it with dream seed. And now remote viewers, technically remote view the origin of that dream. And now we come back and say, hey, you have cancer. In fact, it's pancreatic cancer. But you turned it into a battle because dreams are so mucked up. We have so much to process, most humans, that it gets all junked up.
What fascinates me is some people will say that they don't dream at all.
No, that's true. That's true. In fact, many of my new students who came to many of my workshops, many of them never dream. I was surprised to find this out, but I tell them, after one day in this workshop, you'll start dreaming. Wow. Because it opens up, technical remote viewing, opens up this aperture where now you have access to your unconscious and you didn't before. And so those days of non-dreaming are over once you begin to learn technical remote viewing. It's an interesting spin-off, tangentially speaking, of empaths an empath can pick up all the emotions of somebody on the street in New York City as they're walking down Manhattan or whatever. And that's a curse. That's not a blessing. So empaths, who are like that and are plagued by that kind of thing, when they learn remote viewing, they learn to separate. In fact, we must be able to do this, to separate their own feelings from somebody else's, or an animal, for instance. They've got to be able to do that to effectively complete a remote viewing session. And once they learn that, all these people that have been plagued by this as empaths, picking up on everybody's emotion, that's gone. They learn how to separate their own from somebody else.
Do you think that's one of the biggest obstacles in remote viewing, is separating, like you said before, your imagination from the viewing?
Well, empaths are different. Here you're dealing with an emotional state, an emotional factor. But in terms of learning remote viewing, the imagination is our enemy. But we can't try to push it away throughout the session. I won't get too technical here, but we have to accommodate it, because you can't shut it down. You can't stop it. So we have to learn how to recognize, when it's operative and when it's not, when it's sitting back and when it's active, when it creates something that's yellow and soft into a banana, where in fact it was a cancer cell in somebody's breast. Then we have to learn when our imagination is active, but we shunt it and we manage it. Sort of like your drunk uncle that comes to a family reunion. You got to invite him, and you know what he's going to do, but Uncle Willie has to be there anyway. So we manage imagination, and in certain states, very, very rarely though, we actually invite it in to help us out in one stage of remote viewing, but it's not common. Usually we say, if we do that, we say, thank you very much, and slam the door shut on it again. But it's going to come back. And we as professionals have to know when that's there. So the question is, when people film me and camera-wise, how do you know your data is correct at the end of the session? I said, because I was in remote viewing structure. The sheet music, I played that music. I didn't stop and I didn't think. That's how I know I'm right. So it's very systematic, very rigorous, very systematic. It's not fun. Well, the answers to questions are fun and exciting, but you cannot allow any bias, no ego. I have a big ego, but when I remote view, that better be out the door, because you can't allow your ego or your preconceived notions about a target to be there. Let's say I'll give you a minor note, a real world example. Portland, Oregon, there was a case in Oregon where the cops said, Ed, this girl was murdered and thrown out of a car on the side of the road. So we know she's dead, but the way she died, we don't go in there considering it a murder. Long story short, high school girl who was riding in the car with her friends, and she overdosed, and the kids panicked and threw her out of the car. That's not a murder. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing we do.
Wow.
Precision.
After you left the Army program, you started your own matrix intelligence agency, and I believe you were doing things like finding missing people. Can you tell us about that?
I think rather than tell you, your viewers can just go over to, I have a community where I teach, a teaching forum. It's not majordamesnews.com, where I have big announcements that are important to a large number of people. This is only for my remote viewing community and my students and my professionals. If you go to learnrv.com and you go into the community, and you'll see right away everything I'm doing. For instance, 3 days ago, I just came back from Winnemucca, Nevada. I live in the Sacramento area, on a cold case where 2 elderly people were killed by a serial killer, actually 2 killers. And I was there to recon the area so I can track down their bodies. I already know where the killer lives, where the killers live, but I need the evidence. I need the bodies first before I do anything about that. So you can see all that, the current work in terms of those things. But I'm gravitating almost completely now away from crime cases into contact, which I have 30 years of background in, and that will start next week with a Bigfoot contact reconnaissance in the Lassen Volcano National Park area in California, and that's a long, involved story. But contact is still, I think it's imperative that we have contact. The background there was, we had contact the CE2s. I used the military team in the Spy unit to find a place, a hot zone in the United States. And we found one using remote viewing. And that was Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. So we went out there on a number of surveys and expeditions, and yes, we're having flybys. So in the end, I got to put together a team of the best scientists and engineers in this country, Hal Puthoff, folks from the Skunk Works and all that. And the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein sponsored us, Hans-Adam von Liechtenstein. He paid for the expedition and all the equipment and our trip. In fact, he was out there with me quietly because he was one of the youngest billionaires in the world at the time. And many people would have loved to kidnap him. Yeah. So only the princess and the Swiss embassy, Liechtenstein didn't have its own embassy, knew that he was in the country with us on this UFO quest. So we had flybys, but we didn't have a CE3 or anything, a direct contact. And I had to figure out why. I had to use remote viewing to figure out why we didn't have a tete-a-tete, a coffee clash with the agency out there. And by agency, I mean this. Because our resources are limited, we've got to punch through these lines, and we can't spread ourselves thin across a broad defensive position, so to speak. We got to punch through somewhere. What I decided to do, the place I decided to punch through was this. In 1994, at the Ariel School outside of Harare, Zimbabwe, there was an event, very famous event. John Mack, the late John Mack, was in South Africa at the time, flew up to interview the kids that were involved in this event. I got to see the original 35 millimeter tapes and all this. And you can find this. All these kids are grown now. They're adults. You can find all these reports and their statements on the internet. Just look up for Ariel School, Harare, Zimbabwe, and you'll find all of this information. So here the kids were on the basketball court at lunchtime, and the middle schoolers were on one side of the court. The high schoolers were on another side. All of a sudden, the middle schoolers, I think there were about 20 of them, they stop. They look into the savannas where the kids weren't supposed to go because there were hyenas and snakes, and they walk out. And the older kids playing basketball didn't think much of it. And these kids come back with this story, and you read all that there. And I thought, this is where I'm going to make the breakthrough here. I'm going to use a full court press, use all the professional remote viewers and all the techniques and methods that we know, and find out all I can about this agency that orchestrated that event. It doesn't matter whether they were projecting or whatever they were doing, but they did it for a reason. And I wanted to find out what. And for instance, they picked school children, a school and children. Children are our future. They're the Earth's future, mankind's future. And I said, I want to know who these guys are. Who did this? What was the outside agency that orchestrated this event? I mean, they had to use resources, and even if they're 500 billion years ahead of us, they're still doing it for a reason. So I decided to punch through there, and that got me what I needed. It got me for me to remote view what their protocols are for contact, not what we think they are, right? What their protocols are. By all the Project Blue Book hypotheses about what they didn't work. But remote viewing, there's nothing can hide from that. There are no secrets, right? Whether you're a fugitive or ET, no future. And these aren't ETs, by the way, they're something else. But to use remote viewing to look at what it would require for them to meet, well, it was simply remote viewing, a higher consciousness tool, not an inferior thought system. But remote viewing tools are consciousness tools. It happens to be the lingua franca for all of the different, our galaxy is teeming with life, but all these forms of life are different. My God, we can't even communicate with females as a Homo sapien species, right? Yeah. So, much less dolphins. And I've done dolphin projects before. But consciousness is still the lingua franca. It's still whether somebody looks, the Gary Larson cartoon about the Frisbees came to Earth armed with all the secrets of the universe. Mm-hmm. Melvin came armed with his 308, that kind of thing, because they look different. And it's fear of the unknown, right? That's a big one. The biggest fear is death. for humans, because it's the great unknown too. So we have to overcome our fears as remote viewing, which is sometimes difficult to do, especially in the military when we're looking at battles, what went down. So what I did was use remote viewing to look at their protocols for contact, direct contact, and I did that and it worked. So essentially, they're saying if you go here, we'll meet you, rather than us chasing UFOs or gee, what happened over here. We, as remote viewers, we can reconstruct those things, but I want contact because remote viewing is hard work. It's better to sit down with them and let them educate us. So the Bigfoot phenomenon, Sasquatch, is directly connected with the system. Sasquatch is not what you think it is. They're downloaded from a technology that we cannot understand, and they're uploaded back up. And when they're back up, uploaded, they do not look like gorillas. There's something very, very different. So all of this over the years, particularly the last 100 years, has been presented by that system out there as a conundrum, a problem to be solved. But it can't be solved with intellectual reasoning. You have to use higher consciousness tools to do it. Precision tools to do it. So they've actually encouraged the development of evolution from us as Homo sapiens, the sentient man, the Homo noeticus, the knowing man. We're too far balanced, off balance materially. We've forgotten all about for instance, some of the things that we do as advanced professional technical remote viewers have probably been done before as yoga cities 1,000 years ago. The knowledge has been lost. That's all. But they didn't have to apply it in a technical environment. The oracle at Delphi could say, oh, General Horatio, the enemy plans on flanking you from the west and then coming up from the rear. Oh, thank you very much. But they didn't have to find the hydrogen leak on the space shuttle, or where's the oxygen leak on Biosphere 2, like we did, or what's going on with the ozone layer, like Lawrence Rockefeller asked to do. They didn't have to do that. So this tool, technical remote viewing, solves that problem because it's for a world today where mechanisms are prevalent. I hope I didn't overload you.
No, you're great. Is it possible to remote view targets like Pumapunku, the pyramids, some of these ancient places, and see what really happened there?
Interesting things happen in certain places, like at the Mayan, some of the Mayan temples. When a remote viewer, even in the intermediate stages of training, if they remote view some of these pyramids, there's actually some type of an energetic connection between the apex of the pyramid up, and we don't know what that is. Maybe the Mayans did, but we don't understand it. But yeah, remote viewing is outside of time. It's outside of time. Mind is outside of time. Mm-hmm. So we can remote view anything in the past, and we can look into the future. That's why when I talk about public, so many years about the kill shot, this solar event that's going to really do the damns to us. We were looking ahead at at an event that would harm a great deal of people. We wanted to look at future wars, but this event, the kill shot event, so-called eclipses the number of people that will be harmed in the future. But we can look at the past too. For instance, one of my favorite examples, suppose, and this is a real world example too, suppose a paleobotanist comes to me with a piece of a plant material and a fossil and asks us to remote view that. We can spend several days remote viewing that particular fossil piece and recreate exactly what it looked like. We can cut through it and see if it had phloem or xylem tubes, if it was carnivorous, all of that, where it lived, the environment, those kinds of, its life cycle, seeds or flowers. We can do all that. But if the paleobotanist says to us, when did it live? We can't do it because we don't know where we are in time. If I remote view you, I have to specify when, now, present time. Otherwise, I pick you up from a neotenate state to death, because mine's outside of the time. So we have to employ, in those cases like that, temporal qualifiers, past, present, now, most recent, those kinds of things.
Right, yeah, because I don't think remote viewing's like a prophecy. You have to interject time in there, right?
we have to be exact. People say, hey, Ed, why didn't you predict 9/11? I said, because we weren't looking there. Right. Remote viewing, you're specifying what the target is, right? Yeah. The factory, your glasses, the truck that brought them in. We want the information about the truck because that truck was involved in a hit and run case or something like that. Or the factory that produced the glasses, or where the silica, what plant did the silica that made the glass come from? Was it New Mexico? Was it Russia? This kind of thing. We can do all that. And so because you can know anything, this is a life-changing experience when you learn remote viewing. Or on the subject, the Learn RV DVDs that I'll point to later. People are interested in actually learning this, then those DVDs can do that for them, right up through the intermediate stages. That's because we can know anything and life is short, then you really have to question yourself. Louisa May Alcott, when her suitors came, who wrote Little Women, the classic, I think that's banned now by academia. I won't go there. So anyway, when her suitors approached, because she was pretty, and one of the things she would advise them is that you only have time to read so much in life. So, you pick 100 books, only 100 books, and of the best classics and science to read, because life is too short to waste with junk, stuff like that. So we have to apply a similar inquisition to ourselves and say, okay, what do I really want to know? And for me, it's missing children for the obvious pulls the heartstrings, and child murderers. I had to get that out of the way. But the key is contact. I firmly believe that we're going down as a planet. I predicted economic collapse way back when Art Bell, but we're committing ecocide, and we are going down as a species, period. There's no ifs, and I think that we need guidance and outside guidance, but we have to ask for it. We have to ask for it. They're not going to land in the White House long, because if they do, whoever they are, and I know who that they are, then we're going to say, hey, can you solve our deforestation problem? Can you solve our disease problems? And if they don't, if you're not our friends, you must be our enemies. So they're coaxing us to evolve. I feel strongly that the most evolved races in this neck of the woods, these galaxies around us, I feel strongly that they can't evolve unless they bootstrap. You're only as strong as your weakest link. We knew that in the infantry. Don't Private Snuffy over here, and you have to watch out for him, because sometimes he hangs behind while you're assaulting the enemy and he shoots you in the back. Don't do that. So you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if galaxies evolve, all of the creatures in the galaxy are subject to evolution, going back, evolving, then they have to bootstrap wisely the lower links. Then they can't interfere, as Gene Roddenberry would know. The prime directive would homogenize all of the creature, all of the intelligent life in the universe, into one, just one channel of evolution, and that would be tyranny on the spiritual scale, I suppose. I'm philosophizing now.
Elon Musk has his company called Neurolink, and I think what he's trying to do is basically hook your brain up direct into the internet. And I think he'll say that if AI happens, and once it's done, the human race, there's no need for humans anymore, and we may be eliminated. So we need this. What is your take on that?
I'm a simple man. Of course, I know about what's going on out there. I used to brief DARPA and the president directly about certain things. So I'm up to speed on what people are intending to do. And it's not my job. It's not something I should be concerned on my watch. On our children's watch, they have to be concerned with it. But it's not something I just don't have any opinions there. AI can be very dangerous on the battlefield. I mean, come on. I was a soldier. I was, way up at the top. And General Schwarzkopf, for instance, I was the man in black. He had to do exactly what I told him to do in Desert Storm. because I had battle plans at the strategic level. And my, I'm not supposed to say this because I got dinged on it coast to coast, but my wet dream would be to have AI that would kill, without killing my soldier, kill everybody, all my enemy on the battlefield. That's a dream come true, right? Well, it's certainly not consistent with human evolution, as I feel, but that's the logic that we had. Screw the whales and all that. I was a member of Greenpeace, but when I was a kid, screw the whales, screw the civilians. Here's the mission. But one of the things that the Russians had was a weapon. It's very highly classified. But when they used it, it blew about 1% of the Earth's atmosphere into space forever. It's lost, gone. So it's worse than a nuclear weapon. Yeah. And so we wanted to duplicate that. I said, don't do it, man. I said, I don't care how many clearances I have and how far above top secret I am. You ain't doing this to my planet. Because I've remote viewed Gaia, the idea of Gaia. Some other time I'll tell you, because we can't understand the Earth itself or Jupiter, which is has a consciousness all their own. They're aware. And so our remote viewing data is all metaphor and all metaphor. But it's the Earth crying out for help. And the help is coming in the form of eradicating a good deal of the cancer on the surface of the Earth, that the Earth is no longer has the wherewithal to manage. And that's coming from the sun sooner than we think. So that's why I say that a contact is very necessary. Now, what that means in terms of the future of man is that, yes, many, many millions of people are going to die. But how does a system out there preserve the rest of mankind? And that's the kind of guidance that we need. And while I'm on the subject, it's important to note that there will never be a nuclear slugfest. When I was a kid, we had to practice all this stuff to get on your desk at school, drills. There will never be, ever, a nuclear slugfest. This is not our garden. It belongs to the species, all of the species. And we're not going to be allowed to destroy it. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, yes, here's the consequences of what you do when you do that. Right? But there will never be a nuclear slugfest. You know why? Because that system out there, that's based in seamounts, particularly the Pukao Seamount, 100 miles nominally to the west-northwest of Easter Island. That system that orchestrated the Ariel event, they know where every nuclear weapon is, whether it's in storage, on a boomer, whatever. They know where everyone is. And just like they showed us up there in North Dakota, they can shut everyone down whenever they want. They're not going to allow us to destroy this planet, which is not just humans that are present here, and they live here as well. They're interdimensionals. I'm not saying there's not extraterrestrials out there, but all the Tic Tacs and things like that you see on the news, they're all based in seamounts deep under the sea, just like the idea of James Cameron's The Abyss, that idea crossover. They're in these seamounts, and they have exotic technologies. I use the term technology loosely, but they're in these seamounts, and they're the ones that are producing all these things, these kinds of things, and they're also capable of shutting down all of our nukes, the warheads themselves.
I want to mention this, that you have a book out called Tell Me What You See, Remote Viewing Cases from the World's Premier Psychic Spy. And I believe that book is some of the anecdotes of when you were back in the military project. Is that correct?
Right, yeah. It talks about, some things that it doesn't talk about are things that now the CIA has finally released. And all of your viewers can see all these files that have been released. The operations haven't been released, but all the training files. And all of the UFO stuff that's been released was on as a training officer, I got away with that. Because at that time, we had no charter. The Department of Defense had no charter or license to study UFOs and those kinds of things. But as a training officer, not just an operations officer, At the Defense Intelligence Agency, I could use whatever I want. So you'll see my initials on all those released documents from Mel Riley, and some of them are fascinating. The Galactic Federation headquarters, this UFO, that UFO, those kinds of things. But as operations, those weren't released. For instance, a drug shipment coming in where the DE, we had clients, U.S. The intelligence. Assistant Director for Intelligence, Army, all the services, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, Coast Guard. These were our clients. They would come to us for where there was an intractable problem, which is why I took over the unit as Ops and Training Officer, because I was, as this nation's key biological warfare defense effort, I briefed at the White House, the president, these kinds of things. I could still not penetrate by hook or by crook using all my stuff, satellites, spies on the ground, all kinds of still classified things, signal intelligence, electronic intelligence, and lots of other things. I couldn't penetrate these top secret Russian programs. But the remote viewing unit could, right? I said, that's it. I'm not like a kid in the candy store. And I stepped down from celestial levels of Office of Secretary of Defense to take over. And I say, okay, here we go. And so one example of an operation would be when the Coast Guard said, we think that this ship, this vessel is carrying drugs, but and we want to board it in international waters, which is against the law, but what the heck, close enough for government work, that we want to board the ship, but we don't know where the drugs are. We highly suspected it was loaded. So the remote viewers, what we did was remote view where on that ship the drugs were. First of all, we didn't assume that they were there, but we found them because they're novel. They're out of context. And novelty in experimental psychology, experimental psychologists know that novelty acts as a stimulus. So we go right to the drugs. Well, they were welded inside the bulkhead, right? Wow. So the Coast Guard hops on the ship, stops the ship, hops on. They have an arc welder and cut open the bulkhead and reveal all this heroin. And so the cartel head feels that they have no idea that psychic spies were used. So they felt they had an inside informant and started grilling all their, now they're spooked because they don't know if somebody on the inside who's divulging the information. Not just one type of operation we did. All the others were missing hostage situations. Terry Waite, Terry Anderson, Colonel Higgins, those people where we were asked to remote view where they were, under what conditions, their state of being or non-being. We couldn't do it because we couldn't locate them. If you give us Cartesian coordinates, we can be right there remote viewing those coordinates. But we couldn't do the obverse, what in land navigation is termed a resection. It took me 20 years to solve that problem. So now we can do it. But back then, all we could do was describe very accurately the situation of the hostage or the but we couldn't locate them. Where in the Mideast are they? We could, but by the time, for instance, we were tasked with killing Muammar Gaddafi in the first Libyan war. So my job was to find him so that Delta Force, at that time it was blue light, progenitor of Delta, could kill him, or we could drop a bomb on him. But he surrounded himself with children, so at that time we walked the high road, the moral high ground. We wouldn't have done that. The Israelis would have done it for us. We subcontracted them out. But as remote viewers, by the time my team had the location of Muammar Gaddafi, it took 2 days with a lot of work, looking for recognizable obstacles, recognizable structures, man-made or natural, so we can compare them on a map. Then we could finally say, okay, he's here, but he had moved, the shell game type of thing. So in the end, he got to live until he decided to use gold as instead of the petrodollar. And then, yeah.
What would you say inspires you the most about the work that you do with remote viewing?
It never ceases to amaze me. I've said the matrix itself that we use in our work. At first, in the old days, I thought it was like a library where you just go in and pull a certain book that you need. But then it started to do things like the idea of you might also be interested in this type of thing when we do an internet search. You may also be interested in this. It started to do that. I said, hey, it's like a librarian. But later on, I realized, it's a teacher. It's something out there is teaching us, developing us. But it has to be done in a very systematic way and a very structured way. And we have the capability to do it. God knows what else we have in terms of human potential. Humans are amazing, but there has to be a structure there. For instance, if we compare learning a language as a child, especially in the age around 2, we're developing the ability to acquire language. It's really fast. A kid that's taught at that age can be a polyglot very easily if they're taught during those formative years. But there has to be a structure. There has to be a structure there, English, Chinese, German, or whatever. Otherwise, we can never communicate other than clicks and grunts and gobbledygooks or hand signals. But that structure of the language that we learn allows us to communicate effectively and communicate the blueprints for this spaceship to another one, to another person, those kinds of things. So what was discovered at Stanford Research Institute in the 70s was this, especially the driving force was Ingo Swann, of course, the father of remote viewing. I dedicate my book to him in the U.S. Army. He discovered a syntax and grammar. As a psychic, a world-class psychic, he studied himself. How am I able to do this? And that's what developed into this structure, which evolved now into technical remote viewing. There's much more I could say about that, of course, but we need a few years.
Well, and speaking on that, I'm running out of time. So let's go here.
I'm running out of the beer.
And you're running out of beer. Do you have any projects that you're working on right now that you want us to know about?
Yes. Yes, I do. It's the big one. It's the acme of my career. It's Sasquatch. I told you about what Sasquatch is. It isn't what you think. Bigfoot is not what you think. You go into the literature and people will say, hey, there was this thing in the sky and then there was a Sasquatch. Well, yeah, that's what we're dealing with. And that's I'm going up to meet not Sasquatch, although that would be fun because I'm bringing cameras and all this electronic gear and stuff like that. But they find you. They find you if they want. And that this time, because I met one of the key criteria for higher consciousness, the way they perceive it in humans, and their protocols for contact, because I met that, they have no choice. The system has no choice in terms of carrot and the stick. They must respond. They must respond. And when they do, and when there is contact, and there's things that I wish that would happen when that happens, I'll get into in a minute, then the relationship between that system that orchestrated the school event and Bigfoot, the relationship between us and that system changes forever. The curtain is now pulled back on the wizard and everything changes forever. So that's what I would like to, I'm going next week on my first expedition and I expect it to be successful this month and next month and then progress. What I would like, instead of just taking pictures of stuff, what I would like for them to do is this is my hope, a mini Day the Earth Stood Still type of an event where they communicate with me. The Bigfoots are psychic. The system is psychic. They don't need to talk, as you probably know. Where they say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this destroyer that's parked here in Long Beach. We're going to shut down all of its weapon systems or whatever. A mini Day the Earth Stood Still, right? And then for me to communicate with people like you and say, okay, here's what they told me, telepathically. Here's what they've decided to do based upon our first meeting. They're going to do that. Then, when that happens, now I have an audience. Now I have a real audience. Okay, what else do you know about them? And so all the deep state, all the military, industrial community, they're going to cower because there's nothing they can do about that system now. Nothing. at all. No matter how much money you have or how powerful you are, there's nothing they can, and that's why they're so afraid of contact. In fact, look at the release last week. DOD is using it to get more money for defensive and offensive weapons, saying, "Oh, it must be Soviet, it must be Russian, it must be, or even the ETs. We need better weapons." Is that evolution? I don't think so. That's not Homo noeticus.
I hope we can get you back when you've done some of this research and you can follow up and tell us about what you're finding.
Unless they vaporized me.
Well, I don't know.
Because I could be wrong. I do not. I'm going up there with no expectations. I don't know what's going to happen, although I know something is going to happen. But I don't know what. However, because we're talking about something, let's say nominally 500 million years ahead of us or more. Okay, so, we're the apes in 2001. I'm going up there with two things. I want to learn. I'm going to start with two questions. Who are you and who are we? And take it from there and just be a good student.
Yeah. I recently read that aliens don't want nothing to do with us because we're a fallen species. You buy that?
No, we're not a fallen species, but we're an inferior species. And we're treated like children because we act like children. But we're not. There are fallen angels. I believe there are fallen angels. I can't prove it, but it's not us. No, we're not a fallen species. We're a species that has the potential to, incredible potential, but there's this idea evil is real. It's just it's eating us up.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever remote viewed other world leaders and maybe, high up or leaders of countries? You don't have to say names. And do you ever see some kind of consistency with them, like why they all do the things they do, plunder the earth and keep everybody down?
Yes. This idea of I have to watch myself. I have to be careful here because I can get in trouble. Me and my family can be in danger if I cross the realm. For instance, when I was a spy master, I was backstopped. I could go to Guatemala or Costa Rica. I'm a professional bird watcher. I mean, I'm a birder. And I can go on my own cover could be as a birder, but even though I was using agents to spy for me, but I had a cover. I had a backstop. And I had a real office and all this kind of stuff, the same way spies do, right? I mean, that's what we do. But when I got out of the service, I didn't have that anymore. I have my own intelligence agency, the Matrix Intelligence Agency, but it's not backstop. So I'm not going to do something stupid, like look at the transshipment center for the Cali cartel's heroin shipments in Guatemala and publicize that, because I'll be gone very fast. It only costs $10,000 to pay a Colombian kid to knock you off, if they can get into the country, which of course our border is so sealed they can't. But anyway, so I don't do things like that. But in terms of this global, I can't even mention the name, but yes, there's a system out there. Part of it is the Soldatensbund. Those 17 submarines that left with Adolf Hitler in World War II and were beached off the Argentinian coast, they possessed the records of Interpol. Interpol was a bunch of French partisans, right, that started Interpol, but they were Nazi sympathizers, and they were owned by the Nazis. And the Nazis took all their dossiers with them and praying, hoping one day to start the Fourth Reich. And Hitler was with them too, Eva Braun. We've remote viewed the location of Hitler's grave and Eva Braun's, not in the same place, in Uruguay. So they really, in this dark web, can control, via all kinds of means. They possess control because they're ensconced. A good example would be when Father Malachi Martin and I used to talk about this. This idea of the evil is in the center of the Vatican, and it always points that way, but and nothing's looking back at itself. So it ensconced itself in a domain that's very powerful. The same way that these Nazis, the Soldaten, formed a worldwide thing where they controlled people via blackmail, particularly blackmail. But if you don't cotton up to the blackmail, they'll take you out, just like that. So for me to identify those people would be suicide on my part. Even talking about them is not a good thing, but they exist too. And if you remote view the concept of the Antichrist, that concept, the Antichrist, the Antichrist is a millennial idea that's real. And each age, each era, there's a different person that maintains that gestalt, that zeitgeist among them. And we have periodically taken a look at this, say who is carrying this particular idea. It's not DNA, it's just an idea. So we've looked at that too, but there's nothing I can do about that. So I only want to engage in things to maximize and prioritize the rest of the time I have left as a professional remote viewer, to make sure that my kids, my grandchildren, are in that federation. I want them in, Jeff. I want my grandkids in that federation.
I definitely need to get you back because I need to talk about that. But before we go here, is there one master website where people can find your books, your videos, your learning DVDs and stuff? And if so, what is that?
MajorDamesNews.com.
All right. Well, before we wrap it up here, do you have one last message that you want to give everybody?
I have one. I have a remote viewing session that I want to. I briefly said that to show you how when we think we're smart, we're not. I gave somebody I loved, who's deceased now, a female. I gave her a session after I trained her. It was her birthday, and I used a topical search, not a where's the murder weapon. It's a topical search, because I thought it would result in something that would be halcyon and beautiful. And the search term, the topical search, those of you who are remote viewers know what topical search is, God's infinite love. And I gave that to her as a blind target. She didn't know what the target was. So my office was in Beverly Hills, and it's 2 hours, and she's not out of there. Her birthday. And I open the door, and I look, and she's splayed out on the couch with at least 45 pages of bond paper on the table. That's how long she had been working this. And she says to me, "I thought you loved me. Why would you give me a target like this?" And I said, "Okay." And I looked at the data. And that week was the week that John Lacey was going to Old Sparky, the electric chair. John Lacey was a serial murderer, and he was sentenced to death. So she had her site template. At the end, all of this comes together and combines into an idea or site template. She had a drawing of John Lacey walking toward Old Sparky. And I thought to myself, okay, God's infinite love. And I got it. Infinite. I said infinite love. It extends even to a monster like that. So, as the pro, the world's foremost remote viewing teacher, you keep on learning. You learn all the time. Yeah. That's what the Matrix is.
That's amazing.
The Matrix, the font from whence all form arises, is what my teacher, Ingo Swann, father of remote viewing, called it.
Can you say that again? The font?
The Matrix is the font from whence all form arises. And you have to look up the word form, because form is very specific in terms of mathematics and language and philosophy.
All right, Major Dames, thank you so much for being my guest. I really appreciate you. I wish you massive success in whatever you're doing, and have a great evening.
Thanks. The pleasure's mine, Jeff. Hope to talk to you again.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching the Jeff Mara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.